to. Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Mr Speaker, I have actually been waiting for the opportunity that this bill represents to express my significant level of disappointment in the government agreeing to allow this bill to go to a select committee for the sake of political expediency, because that is all that we are going to get from the government on this bill. I actually don't doubt the bona fides of the minister who's introducing this bill. He has stated on the record more than once, and actually the history of this goes back to the time when I was Minister of Commerce and he was a member introducing a private member's bill on regulatory responsibility. And I admire the fact that he has consistently argued for the same result that this bill represents. But the government, I think, deserves to be a little bit more upfront with their approach on this, because we know that they're going to vote for it to go to a select committee, at which point their support for it will end. And that will mean that good people out there will make submissions on this bill, deeply opposed to it, vociferously in favour of it, and we will hear all of those submissions and report it back, and that will be the end of the matter. And I think that isn't fair. I don't think it's fair to the House. I don't think it's fair to the submitters. And I certainly don't think it's fair to the Honourable Rodney Hyatt, who's put so much of his personal integrity on the line on this particular piece of legislation. Mr Speaker, I am not as inclined as the government to waste the time of the House, and therefore Labor will be opposing this bill at first reading, and we will also oppose its referral to the Select Committee. Now, the reason that we want to oppose this is actually on the principle that we don't agree with the content of the bill. The bill contains the original flaw that stymied the original members' bill when it was introduced to the House a few years ago. And that original flaw is that it allows the courts into the lawmaking process itself. And the Minister can say that the sovereignty of Parliament is protected as much as he likes, but we know the courts, and we know that by allowing them to give declarations as to consistency, they will be entering into the legislative arena, and they are not equipped to do so. Enabling people to go to court for a statement of non-compliance will hold up the implementation of government policy. National says that's good. What would have happened to the 100 days of action if the rules that are contained within this legislation were set in concrete at that point? That wouldn't have been 100 days of action. We know how many days of action that would have been. In fact, it would have been 100 days of inaction, followed by many more days of inaction, followed finally by days of action, as proper regulatory impact analysis after regulatory impact analysis after regulatory impact analysis was undertaken. Because I haven't actually gone back and done a count in that first 100 days, but there weren't many that had regulatory impact statements that were of any quality with them at that particular time. No, they didn't have them there. They were just really... they were elected on a policy, a platform, and that's actually what politics is about. They were elected on a platform. They were going to do certain things. There was no way that they were going to introduce regulatory impact statements in order to back them up. So it's okay to have regulatory impact analysis as you end a parliamentary term, but heck no way would you have regulatory impact analysis when you're starting your term with 100 days of action. People are assuming that it's all going to be one-sided about who will go to court and create this period of uncertainty. Do you think the union movement would have gone to court over the 90-day bill? Absolutely they would have gone to court. As the Minister who spearheaded the Quality Regulation Review, I am disappointed that the government is fixated with form over substance. And that's what this bill is. It's form over substance. We don't need a law to tell us to follow guidelines that already exist in this country. We just need ministers who are compelled and who are absolutely determined to undertake all of their work in accordance with those guidelines and principles. You have to have ministers who understand why the processes are important and who require their departments to stand up to the very high standards that they set for themselves. Mr. Speaker, I think that the National Party should be ashamed of itself. Based on the Regulatory Standards Bill's own principles, the bill itself would fail to meet the test of responsible regulatory management. Now, who said that? Do you think that was an extreme left-winger who said that? It wasn't. It was George Tanner, who was New Zealand's top statutory draftsman. He was the chief parliamentary counsel here in this parliament. The bill, he says, uses open textured language that will lead to uncertainty of meaning. According to George Tanner, it attempts to define good law, making by reference to a set of simple principles. In doing so, it obscures the complexities inherent in them and creates the same lack of clarity and uncertainty that it seeks to prevent. Brian Fallow said the principles are abstract, constitutionally unorthodox and substantively unsound. Mr. Speaker, when I launched the Quality Regulation Review, which addressed regulatory barriers to business growth, I knew that we had to have a stronger mechanism in place to make sure that the regulatory impact analysis was being undertaken. And I wasn't able to deliver that from the Ministry of Economic Development's Regulatory Impact Analysis Unit. I couldn't do that. And so therefore I met with Michael Cullen, he was the Minister of Finance. We agreed that we would put the oversight for regulatory impact analysis into the heart of government, into the Treasury. And that's where we shifted it, that's where it stays, and I believe that's where it has always belonged, and enabling departments really to step up to the plate as far as regulatory analysis goes. We made sure that regulation that was being proposed was necessary and was efficient, and we were requiring all of our departments to really come to grips with the problem and identification. And that's one thing that this regulatory impact statement that accompanies this bill doesn't do. It doesn't even have a proper problem definition. So how on earth do you get to fixing a problem if you haven't identified the problem? And then setting out the options? Well, I just want the House to know that Treasury, who we have now entrusted to undertake this role, they don't believe that this option of a bill is the best option for New Zealand. They actually think that legislation does have a status profile and educative effect. So are we just doing this for a figurehead reason? It has a status profile and educative effect that equivalent administrative measures or standing orders can't quite match, but it is also more formal, less adaptable to varying circumstances, harder to fix or amend in response to problems or changing needs, and brings with it the potential involvement of the courts with sometimes unpredictable results. For promoting legislative quality, there are limits to what we can expect from a legislative initiative. It is very hard to use legislation to target the quality of policy development and legislative review because the quality of these processes is not readily observed or verifiable by outsiders. It can only encourage behavioural change, but the pressures, incentives and biases acting on ministers and officials that lead to poor legislation are strong. Unless it somehow catalyses a new behavioural norm, the gains in legislative quality will probably be modest. The big question marks are really the risk of unintended outcomes and the ability to manage costs if benefits turn out to be far less than hoped. There are reasons we do not recommending adoption. One, the task force's proposed bill and the modified version that we have here today. The likely approach and effective court involvement is impossible to predict, and we think the interpretive direction creates a particular risk of unintended consequences. Mr. Speaker, this bill does precisely the opposite of what it states that it intends to do, and that is why the Labor opposition will not be supporting the introduction and the referral of this bill.